Okay, so I believe we're all set. Everybody can listen to us? Yeah? Okay, that's great. So let's rock. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. If I didn't say yet to you, good evening. Thank you very much for sharing your free time with us. We know it's, I don't know, like after work, you really must love literature to come to class during a weekday at 7 p.m. We're very glad to have you all here. I'm Áureo. I will be talking more today. And this lovely lady at the left side of me is Anna. She's the creator and one of the teachers here at A Book a Month, in case you haven't met her yet. And if you sent us any message in WhatsApp or Instagram, you've talked with her actually. Okay. So let's start.
Yes, sorry guys, I was just like sharing the link so everybody can participate on YouTube as well. Hey everyone, great to see you all. Some of you we've met last week, right, for the other class of the Jabberwocky, so I'm very glad that you're here with us to learn more about Gothic literature and the secrets of this very, very, very much loved genre. And we were quite surprised of how Gothic literature is beloved among students and readers. We have just been digging in the subject recently, right, and approaching it to the public. And we're very glad to know that everybody here is interested in the subject. So welcome. I'm Ana. Yes, Ana Carolina Torquato. Probably I have spoken to each and every one of you who are here today because I'm mostly the person behind our social media, WhatsApp, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, you name it. I'm learning how to deal with this thing. Yes. Uh, to prove that I'm able to be updated to this new generation as well, right? So I'm a teacher at A Book a Month, and I'm a PhD in literature. I have also finished my first postdoc recently, and I have been dedicated to the study of literatures in English for quite some time. I did my master's in England at the University of Sheffield. And this is, of course, my passion, right? It's something that I have been doing for a while. A book a month is a very rewarding reading project. And of course, I'm not alone in this project. I'm in very good company with Áureo Lustosa. He is at the moment doing his postdoc in literature at the University of Padua in Italy, and this is why we are living here. He has done his master's and PhD in Italy as well. And he also hosts a very interesting and very popular podcast, Literatura Viral, that I'm sure some of you have heard before, right? So we have been on this partnership for some time now. And A Book a Month is a reading project that is mostly focused on reading literature, reading authentic texts in order to practice and improve your English skills, but also to learn while reading actual literature text, right? Not adapted texts, not abridged text, but actually authentic material. And we do that by mostly reading these topics either in class or beforehand, before coming to class, and discussing it actively, talking about the stories, talking about the text, but also learning about the subjects and whatever the text can elucidate, right? So we only work with original material, something that has been not adapted and is purely authentic, right? So this is a great way to learn. And Áureo is going to be the one conducting the class today, and I'm going to be then doing some comments every now and then. And I hope that you enjoy all the class and Áureo. The floor is yours. If you need
Thank
my
you, Anna.
assistance, I'm here.
So, guys, I have to admit that we're cheating a little bit today because this open class is actually class number 0 of one of our courses, the Novels Advanced course, in which we will be reading Gothic novels. So, so some of the students are here, and for them, this is class 0. Class 1 is starting in 2 weeks. For the other ones of you that have met us in the internet, welcome. This for you, this is an open class, just in which we'll be just discussing this topic. Okay. So this is the motivation behind it, and so this is why you see us giving the basis for us to discuss the Gothic. Okay, Gothic fiction, Gothic literature is something that is extremely important for the history of literature in England, in the USA, in Australia, in New Zealand, in any of the English-speaking countries. But it's extremely influential internationally. Okay, so today we will be focusing on Gothic that was written in English originally, but please do remember that there are German Gothic novels and French Gothic novels and Brazilian Gothic novels and so on. You know, the Gothic is not that does not exist solely in Europe. It's pretty much everywhere around. Okay. And so, yeah, there will be a little bit of propaganda too, because so many of our courses this semester will be dealing with the Gothic. For example, in here, you're seeing the short stories lists of authors, and a good half of them are somehow related with the Gothic, be it Edgar Allan Poe and Mary Shelley, but also maybe lesser known authors like Angela Carter or Akutagawa, right, who was a Japanese writer that was highly influenced by Poe. The same thing applies to another course, the reading class, in which, once again, about 40% of the things we'll be reading are somehow linked to the Gothic. Once again, Edgar Allan Poe and Emily Dickinson are quite obvious choices. But then Virginia Woolf, what is she doing that? Like connections with the Gothic? How come? You know, so I hope this class will clarify those things. Okay, enough of a propaganda for now. Let's start digging straight into it. And first questions first. What is the Gothic, right? This I think every class in literature and art should always start like this, and they often do, right? What exactly we're talking about? You know, the humanistics, when you're doing the humanities, it's extremely important for us to define what we're talking about. And Gothic fiction is very difficult to define, okay? So first, because Gothic does not only apply to literature. Gothic applies originally to architecture, actually. So architecture, and it can also be used in painting, and it can be used in many different forms of art, in movies too, if we want, although we talk more of horror movies rather than Gothic movies. When we're talking about literature, we tend to use this word, the Gothic. And we could define the Gothic as related to the aesthetics of fear. So it is a work of art, in our case, literature, but it could be a movie, it could be a painting, that somehow wants to invoke fear, okay? That it wants to invoke this shadowy aesthetics, you know? And if you are not really sure, I think you all understand what I mean, but if you're not really sure, I can show you a few pictures. So I think we can all agree there's nothing particularly scary about the moon, but still it's part of the aesthetics of the thing, you know, like this. It's a beautiful picture, but depending on what time of the day it is, you would not want to be in this lovely woods, right? Especially if you're alone, like this guy seemed to be. So this is the kind of thing that Gothic fiction is looking for, creating this aura of mysticism, maybe secrecy, coldness, perhaps. We see a lot of fog, we see a lot of snow, we see a lot of graveyards like in here, or ruined buildings. So you always have this invocation that there's something else over there, this feeling of menace, and this feeling of claustrophobia. Okay, so when we read Gothic fiction, very often it is about escaping something. Sometimes it is not very clear what do we have to escape from, and we're reading the heroes. They feel threatened, but they're not very sure what exactly is hunting them. The classic Scooby-Doo scene. Do you remember Scooby-Doo, the cartoon? They walk into this ruinous house, and then they feel they are observed somehow, and then the paintings are moving their eyes, and the armors are moving after they pass in the corridor, something happens, so this idea of claustrophobia, that if you're looking for a fancy literary term, if I was in the University of Padua right now, I would be using the expression locus horribilis, okay? So in Latin, this means a horrible place. This is one of the characteristics of the Gothic, this feeling of claustrophobia, of being in a horrible place. Another very important element is the threat of the place itself, but also the threat of the monstrous, okay? And the monstrous can be a ghost, can be a vampire, can be Frankenstein, that is a new ghost, right? Or it can be a wild animal of some kind, maybe a wolf, for example, the big bad wolf. But sometimes it's something more metaphorical, It could be a serial killer. It could be, and sometimes it's very imprecise. It does not have to be a monster in the supernatural sense of the word. It could be a monster in the more metaphorical sense, okay? But there is some kind of threat, linked to the Gothic, linked to characters, and linked to the place where the story is happening, There are also a fourth element of the Gothic, is that there are intrusions from the past, okay? So there is this sense of menace and being hunted down comes from the place itself, because, if you're walking in the woods at night alone, it is threatening somehow. It comes from other characters that reminds us of monsters of some kind. If you read Frankenstein, the monster is really hunting him down. He is really escaping from someone, But there's also this idea of an intrusion from the past. The past itself is it's a kind of menace of some way. So in Gothic novels, there are always secrets to be discovered, like family secrets, hidden identities. The guy who seemed like the good guy is actually the bad guy. Or, they masks fall and they reveal their true selves. And quite often you see revenge, your grandpa did something to me, so now I'm going to kill you to take revenge upon him, or something like this. If you're thinking about a Mexican soap opera, yes, that is precisely the point too. In Mexican soap operas, you see a lot of this, like family secrets being revealed, people that are double-faced. And actually, Mexican soap operas, they rely a lot in many of the techniques that were initially used in Gothic fiction. So somehow they are, they are linked in a very interesting and peculiar way. The intrusions from the past, they do not happen only in connection with, the family or the identities of the characters. The past also intrudes architecturally. Okay, so quite often the Gothic stories happen in ruins or castles or monasteries or crypts or things like that. So they are in Europe, they tend to be very much linked with the Middle Ages. Okay, when we talk about the Gothic in other countries, like in Brazil, for example, we don't have the Middle Ages, you know? Brazil was populated by millions of people before the Europeans arrived. So it is a lie that Brazilian history started in the 1500s. It did not. Brazil has a story that it's at least 12,000 years old, perhaps even older than that, at least when we're talking about human occupation. But we do not have such a thing as the, medieval constructions. We do not have medieval castles. We do have some constructions that try to look like modern day castles, but they were not built in the Middle Ages. They were built quite recently just to mimic older buildings, So it is a style, it is a genre of fiction that is very much connected with a certain type of space and a certain type of period in the history of Europe, okay? So voila, this is a perfect setting too for a Gothic novel. Maybe the dark woods are good, but also, oh my God, such a nice Gothic cathedral is also a pretty good location for that. And this might not be so surprising if we take in consideration that Gothic is a term that originally was tied to architecture, okay? So it is an architectural style that flourished in Europe from the 13th to the 16th century, more or less, 15th in some places, okay? And it is the style that was taken over by the Renaissance, okay? So, those guys, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, and so on. After the Renaissance, there's a big shift in how architecture looks. But before that, what was all the rage, what was cutting edge in the Middle Ages was precisely these structures here, Gothic architecture, okay? So because Gothic fiction is so interested about the Middle Ages, because it is so interested in ruins, in claustrophobia, in closed, dark spaces, abandoned places. Naturally, Gothic fiction is quite often, set in places like these. So naturally, it got the name almost, by symbiosis. It was very natural for people to start to talk about Gothic fiction by using the term. Quite often, the Gothic involves the supernatural. Okay, so when we're reading Dracula, as far as I know, there are no vampires. Okay, but maybe there are, but as far as I'm aware, they do not exist. They are a product of our imagination. And yet, when Dracula, these supernatural elements, the vampires, they do appear. They do have magic powers. But in other Gothic works of fiction, not only novels, but if we read The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe, for example, there's nothing supernatural about what is happening there. In The Raven, it's a very famous poem. The guy is thinking about his lost beloved woman, right? So he loved this woman, she died, so he's mourning, actually. He's super sad. And then this bird comes in, and then he's repeating continuously, nevermore, nevermore. So never again, right? Nevermore, a nicer way to say it. So there's nothing necessarily supernatural about that. Many birds can actually say words. And so often there is this flair with the supernatural, but it's not obligatory necessarily. What they do almost always have is a pondering, a discussion on the limitations of reason, okay? So even in Dracula, sometimes it's almost irritating, because there's so much evidence that in the novel that vampires exist, that they are looking for the main characters, but still some of the characters simply refuse to admit that vampires could be real. Sometimes even when you put them in the face of the vampire and they are being, eaten alive, still they do not really believe, So in some way, the Gothic fiction wants to flirt with this idea of what are the limits for our beliefs? What are the limits for reason? Okay. And finally, nearly always, Gothic fiction is somehow related to the dramatic and the grotesque even, okay? They simply love pathos. They love drama. Incests, suicide, violence of all kinds, self-mutilation, a live burial, whatever, you name it, you've got it in Gothic fiction, you know? Sometimes it is treated in a serious way. Sometimes it is treated almost in a ridicule way, and it's like movies by Zé do Caixão, you know, it is so bad that it becomes good, you know, and it kind of makes you laugh. So quite often, you know, the limit between the extremely dramatic, the extremely heroic, and the limit in which this becomes laughable and in which becomes ridiculous, it is quite feeble, you know, the border there, it's a fuzzy one, but it's sometimes you feel very grand, but actually the effect is more of a ridicule. So Gothic fiction is always in between both places, and sometimes it is very serious, but sometimes not so much, actually. Sometimes they're almost making a joke in a certain sense, maybe dark humor, but still sometimes they do have humor. One exemplary, really a very good example of the topoi, okay, the very common features of Gothic fiction is this short story by Edgar Allan Poe, The Cask of Amontillado. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorites. One of our open classes a few months ago was about this text, so you can find it in our YouTube channel too if you're interested. And in this story, you have everything you need for a good Gothic story. It is happening in Venice, okay? The medieval city par excellence, right? This city of decadence, very tiny, you know, tiny streets, very dark streets, the city of the carnival, right? So the idea of the carnival, it's connected with masking yourself, you know, because in Brazil, carnival means you take off your clothes, right? In Venice, Carnival is also happening in February. So, but here is winter, right? So it's cold. So you're actually putting clothes and putting masks, right? So you're masking yourself. You're hiding your identity. The carnival comes across also as a time of drunkenness and maybe debauchery, to use a nice word. And so all of these elements of gloom and doom that are so loved by Gothic fiction. So we have two characters that are enjoying themselves in Carnival in Venice. And one of them invites the other to go down the catacombs of his noble house. So he's living in a kind of a castle within Venice, which does not exist. But anyway, he's living in a sort of a castle, and there are catacombs. And so he invites the other one. His name is Fortunato. So he invites his friend, let's go down to the catacombs to get some wine. They're both drunk. And when they get to the catacombs, there are the bones of his, you know, aristocratic family. So you can see in the image here that they are dressed, you know, like with Venetian costumes, and you can see the bones among the casks of the wine. You know, the casks are those big barrels in which you put wine that you can see here in the image too. And then little by little, while they're there looking for the wine, their dialogue starts to get quite weird. And Fortunato starts to behave in a passive-aggressive way that is very ironic, but that is very disquieting, you know? And eventually he's gonna push his friend in one of in a very tiny room, and it's gonna actually bury him there. So he's gonna close the wall, and the guy is going to be trapped alive inside. And then we realize that Fortunato is taking revenge upon this other guy. And by the end of the story, we realize that not only he took his revenge, but he was never caught. So he's admitting to us that he's a killer, and he's actually bragging, right? So he's an unrepentant killer. He's really happy about the fact that he managed to kill the other guy by live in Mirament, and he's sharing this good news with us, you know. So truly, it has all the elements we have just talked about: the horrible place, the threat of the past, the idea that you are in this medieval building. So all of the monstrous character, all of those characteristics combined. Interestingly enough, now if we're moving to the history of the genre itself, now that we have defined it, the Gothic is one of the contributions of English literature to global literature. Okay, it was born with this set of characteristics. It was born in England, and what is often considered by literary critics, and I do agree with this, with what I'm going to say now. Literary critics usually consider that the first Gothic novel was written by this guy here, Horace Walpole. Okay, so he was a man that lived in the 18th century. Okay, 18th century, the age of reason. Voltaire is alive, and Diderot, and you know, the Enlightenment is going on in France and everything. And this guy decides to do the precise opposite. Rather than celebrating human reason, science, and everything, he decides to actually write a novel about darky, gloomy, old churches from the Middle Ages and the terrible things that are happening inside them. Okay, so interestingly enough, he was an extremely wealthy and extremely well placed within British society. Nowadays you'll find him called a writer, an art historian, an antiquarian, and he was all of those things. But he was also the son of England's first prime minister. Okay, and his dad was the most powerful man in English politics for 21 years. Okay, so not a bad place to be. Okay, this meant that not only he would eventually later on become a member of parliament himself, but when he was about 18 years old, he took 2 years off, actually almost three, to do the Grand Tour, okay, the Grand Tour, as they call it. So he traveled to Italy. Remember, back in the day, it was not easy to contemplate art if you did not come to the place, you know. Books would not be good reproductions of how the Mona Lisa looks like, for example. You would have to try to go see it for yourself. There's no TV. There are lots of limitations for your education. And so it was common among the British aristocracy that at some point, especially men, they would take a year or two of vacations, and they would come to France and Italy, especially, sometimes to Germany too. But Italy was always on the itinerary, and they would be traveling around. They would likely learn Italian. They would be sorry. They would be contemplating art in Florence, in Padua, in Venice, and so on. Okay, so he did this for 3 years. Not bad. Okay, traveling France, Switzerland, and Italy. Eventually, he had to go back, and so because he had to become a member of parliament. Okay, so he joined the British Parliament and stayed there for at least another 13 years. Actually, he renewed his term and stayed until 1768. Okay, so this, I forgot to change it here, but this date is not correct. He became a member of parliament in 1741, and he stood there until 1768. So for 27 years, he was a part of the parliament. Okay. Interestingly enough, while he was doing that, when he came back from Italy, he got a lot of antiquities with him. He bought a lot of statues. He bought a lot of paintings and things like that. Once again, he was extremely rich. And he actually constructed, through the rest of his life, one of the greatest collections of medieval and ancient art in the UK at the time. And since he had so many great pieces of art, he wanted to construct a kind of a house museum in which people could come visit him and see his art collection. And so he created what is called nowadays Strawberry Hill House. So he planned himself, he drew how this house would look like, and started construction in 1749. And he worked on it for 48 years. So for the rest of his life, he was fully dedicated to constructing this place here, this house, okay? It is brand new, but it's constructed as if it was something from the Middle Ages, you know? It is not a castle, do you see this tower here? Castles have towers because they can be attacked. And so towers are used for defense. This house is not going to be attacked, so you don't need a tower, actually. But he needed one. You know, he loved the Middle Ages so much that he needed a tower. He needed all these Gothic arches and all of those. Look at the windows. They're also very much in the Gothic style and so on. So he decided to construct this architectural creation of his, really a fantasy, okay, that he called Strawberry Hill House. And inside, it's as spectacular as that, okay? So the outside is pretty cool, but the inside is even better, you know? And it does look medieval. Yes, Anna?
No, I was just going to say that we visited Strawberry Hill House, was this year, right? Earlier this year in January.
Indeed, yeah.
And I posted a video on Instagram showing you some pictures. I don't know if you saw it, but I'm going to reshare it again so you can see it. And of course, I had to add like the background music of Lana Del Rey, because if Horace Walpole was live nowadays, he would, of course, listen to this very goth kind of music type as Lana Del Rey. And people, if you notice the flight stairs that you see here on the bottom left, you will see that like this is the right entrance to the house, and they have like these figures on top of each of the poles of the masts of the stairs, and each of them, they are positioned in a way for as you go up, you have the impression that they are turning their heads to look at you. So it's very much like Scooby-Doo, as Áureo was saying before, but also very scary, and gives us the idea that we are entering a world which would, at any time, something supernatural is going to happen. So the right thing that he experienced in his novels, he's also synthesizing in the architecture that we have in the place as well.
Yeah, you can also see his library here at the middle section, right? And you can see also the books themselves are, are also fitting what we would expect from the Middle Ages. Although I repeat, this looks old, but this is brand new. This is not medieval at all, But that was not enough for Horace Walpole. He also created his own publishing house just because he had the money and he wanted to publish his own books. So he wrote a book and he self-published at his own place that looks like a medieval castle. And he wrote this one book called The Castle of Otranto, or Otranto in Italian, Otranto in English. It was published in 1764, so 15 years after the construction of the house started. And it's very much the same thing in letters, So if this is what his architectural Gothic imagination was creating, this novel, The Castle of Otranto, is his equivalent in literature. Okay, so it took me a long time to get it here, but maybe you were wondering, why is Áureo showing me this place? Beautiful house, but what is the relationship to the Gothic? Pretty profound, actually, because when he publishes the Castle of Otranto, this is the first page of the very first edition, okay? So you can read with me here. Can you see my cursor? Is it, yeah? So you can read it here with me. The Castle of Otranto, a story. Okay, not a novel, not a romance, a story. So there is the idea that this is a real thing, okay? Moreover, he does not sign the book. He wrote it, he created it. It's a fake, okay? It's completely fictional. But he calls it a story as if it was a real story. If this was a movie, it would be, in the first images, it would be said, based in true life events or something like this, okay? So he is creating the very same effect by calling this a story. And moreover, he pretends that he did not write it. He actually translated by, and then it was translated by William Marshall, a gentleman. So this is his pen name, right? So his pseudonym, from the original Italian of Onufrio Muralto. Okay, Onufrio. Never met an Italian with that name before, but still somehow. So he's pretending that he found a manuscript while he was in Italy. This manuscript was telling us a true medieval tale. It was written in Italian, and so this guy, William Marshall, translated it into English and published it. And you can see the publication date here. It's actually saying 1765, but it's wrong. It was published in 1764, okay? And so he actually lies to the public. He's saying that he translated this work, but it's not a translation. It's his own creation. Very much like Don Quixote. Don Quixote is exactly the same thing, okay? Cervantes pretends that he did not write the Don Quixote. He pretends that he's translating from the Arabic. Exactly the same thing, okay? So this book is playing out the card of the found manuscript. This is so common in literature, so common in movies. And his idea is the fiction is that the fiction is not a fiction, okay? So while we're reading it, he's trying to fool us around as if it was true, but it is fictional, and we know that it's fictional, but he's pretending it's not, So he's playing around with us in the very same way in which the Blair Witch Project, A Bruxa de Blair, played around with us. If you grew up in the 90s, as I did, you were probably terrified of this movie. Because when I watched this trailer, I think I was like 10, and 10 or 12 or something like that. And I watched the trailer in the movies, and what they said is this was a real thing. These students, they went into the woods to make a documentary, and they disappeared, and then they found the tapes. And then when they watched the tapes, there was this horrible story over there. So they published it, and it's all real. And so for me, this was proof that magic existed and witches were real. This was actual proof, I was naive enough to believe in what they were saying, right? And so this is very much the same thing that is going on here, just literary, okay, rather than cinematic. Can I go on? Is everything okay? Yeah. The book was a tremendous success. People got very interested. There were literary essays written on the style of the medieval text. People were trying to figure out many different characteristics of the original manuscript. And since it was a big success, Walpole decided that he would tell everybody that it was a fake. So when he published the second edition, now in 1765, so just 1 year later, he published the second edition, and now he changed the title, okay? Now he signed with his own name, okay? So he's no longer pretending that it's a translation. He's saying, actually, guys, let me tell you the truth. I wrote the book. It is pretty good, I know, and it's mine. And he changed the subtitle. Now it's not The Castle of Otranto, a story, but rather a Gothic story, okay? So this is the birthplace of Gothic fiction. This is the first narrative in which you find all the tropes. The stories happening in an Italian castle. There is this vicious old aristocratic usurper that it took the place of the king, and he is hunting down this innocent virgin that is fleeing from him the entire time. Then you discover that he killed a bunch of people. There is incest. There is everything you can imagine happens. It's pretty grotesque. Eventually you get a happy ending. But and in the cover title, besides calling this a Gothic story, he also quotes from Horace, the Latin poet. Okay, so a poet from antiquity. Um, um, and it's quoting in Latin, but what it means is, as a sick man's dreams, creating vain phantasms. Okay, so a sick man is dreaming about ghosts. Okay, and he claims in the preface of the second edition, he claims that actually he wrote this story after one night in which he had a nightmare and he dreamt with a ghost that was persecuting him in a medieval castle. Okay, so this is why he wrote this Gothic story. Yes, Anna.
I think Horace Walpole read too much Shakespeare, right? Because this is pretty much the plot of Hamlet, right? Hamlet starts reading this opening scene where we have Hamlet coming back to his castle in Denmark to see his parents because he has heard that his father was murdered. And then his first encounter when he arrives in the castle is with the ghost of the father, right? So this is pretty much either he thought that people wouldn't recognize the metaphor, or he was trying to establish a dialogue with Hamlet and Shakespeare himself.
Yeah, and give himself quite a lot of self-importance too, right? Because if what you're saying is I have the imagination of Shakespeare, right? So it's not a little thing to say. He was in fact so proud of his book and of his house that look again at the painting that I showed you guys before. So this is him dressed as a lord, you know, as a member of parliament. Okay, he would be wearing a wig, but I think this is his real hair, but he would be placing the wig on top of it. But look of what he has in his hand. Okay, he's holding a book, and this book is the Castle of Otranto. Okay, and if you look at the back, through the window, you can see a house, and you can see, uh, you can see this house probably is quite familiar now because it is pretty much this one here. Okay, so Strawberry Hill House, his Gothic home, this mixture of a house and a museum, and also his books, his book are both accompanying him in this portrait, and portraits are very expensive to make. They're very time consuming to create. So it's very different from our modern day and age in which we have so many pictures of ourselves. People at this point in time would never have only the wealthy would be able to have paintings of themselves, and often just one or two. Even the super rich would have what, 10, 15, the kings, but not more than that for sure. Okay. This book will create quite a long trend. One of them is the usage of intricate language. Okay, so you can see here little Edgar Allan Poe saying, "Oh, mournful and terrible engine of horror and crime, of agony and death, not asparagus again," So Poe is not so easy to read because his language is quite intricate. His is quite refined grammar. It's not the easiest one. He uses very precise vocabulary, and he does that on purpose. Okay, precisely to create this idea of a gloomy, claustrophobic environment. Another thing that Gothic fiction will be doing a lot is creating contorted narratives, stories within stories, or you're reading the letter, the character receives a letter, and then you read the letter, and then he writes in his diary, and then you read the diary, and then somebody else tells, so you're always finding this, and then sometimes when you read the diary, he's telling a story within the diary. So there are all these games of tales within tales, okay, and this kind of distortion of reality that you see here in Poe holding this nice ball here. And also there's a lot of discussion of taboos too as well. Okay, as you can see here in this case, Paul is not afraid of anything beyond black crows, right? Black birds, but quite fearless guys. And there's a lot of discussions of taboo in the Gothic, and especially sex. Okay, you all know that in the 19th century, you could not talk about sex in English in England, you know. No sex, please. We're British. That is something that it's a joke that works because they would never be talking directly about it. It was not acceptable in civilized society, is what they would call. And so what happens is that often Gothic fiction is kind of talking about it, but in a very indirect way, you know, and sometimes not so indirect, as anyone that has read The Picture of Dorian Gray can see. But they would be talking a lot about different types of taboo at the time. Okay, so now that we have defined what is the Gothic, we have learned about the birth of the genre with the Castle of Otranto. Now we can talk about the big classics, okay? And one of the books that is immediately this is actually not one of the classics, but it's important, and I placed it here. The Old English Baron. Maybe you never heard about it. It's okay because it's not so good and it's not so important in my opinion. But the thing is that what I find it relevant is that it's published by Clara Reeve. Okay, so a woman, and it's published in 1777. So about a decade after Walpole, okay, after the Castle of Otranto. So you can already see that the Gothic is about to get going, and it will become increasingly popular. Another extremely popular Gothic novel will be published about 20 years later, The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. Okay, this one, a big classic, very important. All the books by Radcliffe were Gothic novels. And so the genre will start to accelerate and get more and more attention, more and more, you know, discussions, and really to spread around. And it will reach the apex of this process after we get to the 1800s, you know? Yes, Anna.
And I am just finishing reading The Mysteries of Udolpho. It's a huge novel, like it's very lengthy. I think that in terms of maybe around 26 to 30 hours of reading, right? If you're listening to the audiobook, so it's lengthy as hell. But it's actually a page turner, right? Which is something that is very nice, because I actually, when I started reading this book, I thought it would be not as good as it actually is. It's very much based on plot, but it carries all the kinds of aspects that Áureo was speaking about before. The idea of the chase, there's always like somebody chasing the leading lady. And then we have like a leading lady, a girl who is taking the lead of the actions. It's set abroad, first in France and then in Italy. And then it's full of the idea of the Gothic. She talks about it, right? She uses the word Gothic when she's talking about the landscapes and the abbeys and the castles. And Anne Radcliffe, because of everything and all the details that she is exploring the story, and actually she is catching a lot of attention to her book. She caught the attention of a very important writer, right? And that is Jane Austen herself, because Jane Austen, when she writes Northanger Abbey, pretty much teasing the Gothic genre, right? When she publishes posthumously, I think, right? It was in the same year that she died. The leading lady, Catherine Morland, she is reading The Mysteries of Udolpho, and this is what is going to turn her head to be caught in so much confusion and problematic as she's going to be, right? And Jane Austen chooses Radcliffe's novel in order to be a protagonist in her novel as well, mostly because Radcliffe, she was very prominent at the time, and even not only in terms of writing fiction, but also about talking about the genre itself, fiction, writing nonfiction, writing essays about the idea of what is terror, what is horror. She's writing about the idea of the gloomy, the importance of the landscape for the Gothic. She's really theorizing on the subject, right? So she got a lot of attention for the novels also, but she also became an authority on the subject as well, right? And Jane Austen is also one of the readings that we're doing the semester in the course, right, Áureo, in the advanced.
Yeah, yeah. And by the time she writes Northanger Abbey, you see it's an abbey, so it has the name of this, the Castle of Otranto, the Mysteries of Udolpho, that is a city. Northanger Abbey is also the name of the place, this horrible place, medieval and so on, which is not horrible at all. So in this story is when Jane Austen is writing this book, the Gothic has already 50 years of age. And so it's already established. All the tropes, all the common characteristics of the genre are already very well established. And now Jane Austen was not a fan of the Gothic. And so she wrote this novel to make fun of Gothic novels. So this is the original Scooby-Doo right here. The main character of this story is fascinated, she loves Gothic novels. She's reading The Mystery of Udolpho, as Anna was saying. But she's not living in this terrible world of the Middle Ages and persecution and oppression and everything, but she thinks she is. So she finds herself in so much trouble all the time because she's seeing murderers and vampires and all around. It's a way of Jane Austen to really make fun of this genre.
And you know that in our time, in contemporary times, we actually blame Disney for our very unreal relationship patterns that we invent in our heads, like concerning romance and the idealized men and women and etc. And of course, in the age of Jane Austen and Anne Radcliffe, the guilty ones were the Gothic literature, because all of this idea of the prince who is going to save you, riding a white horse in the middle of nowhere and is going to open the door to your carriage and hand you a letter, and you're going to be thrilled and smitten, and it's going to be something amazing that you're going to sigh for years, right? And this is exactly what she's teasing a little bit. Catherine Morland, her leading lady, right? And also the genre itself, because it elucidates this idea of the romance and every other thing, right?
Yeah. And although Jane Austen is making fun of it, the Gothic is not really concerned. The Gothic just goes on developing. The genre has a very interesting and varied history. And one of the great masterpieces of the genre is published just a year after Northanger Abbey, Frankenstein, right? Or The Modern Prometheus by Mary Shelley. This is also extremely important because it is connecting Gothic fiction with sci-fi, right? So with science and so on, which is not something that you would find before Mary Shelley, but you do find afterwards, this amazing narrative. Later, more or less within the same period. So Frankenstein is published in 1818. In 1827, Edgar Allan Poe starts writing in the US his short stories. He will write for the good part, for the best part of 2 decades. Okay, so he's going to write until 49 for 22 years, and publishes so many, not only short stories, but also poems, right? He did not really write a lot of novels. Okay, he wrote only one real novel, and it has many Gothically inspired incidences, but it's a bit different too. But all of these, all the ones we talked about before, are novels. They are lengthy books. They have like 300, 500, 700 pages in the case of The Mysteries of Udolpho. Edgar Allan Poe turned that on its head, producing very tiny texts, really short stories that are sometimes 5 pages long, sometimes 20, but definitely much smaller, okay? And this kind of set a trend. Even Mary Shelley herself was decided to write short stories that were also dealing with the Gothic. So this is one of them, The Mortal Immortal, that is published in 1833. This is one of the stories we will be reading in the short stories course, The Mortal Immortal. There are also a few other texts that do not share all the characteristics we have discussed so far, but which are always thought of in relationship to the Gothic. So a very good example is Charles Dickens, okay? A Christmas Carol. This is the first page of the first edition, A Ghost Story of Christmas, okay? So, and the Christmas Carol is not taking place in a medieval play, you know, a medieval abbey or a church or whatever. But so there are a few differences, but still the language is quite florid and refined. We do have certain elements of the supernatural dream. Scrooge is being hunted by ghosts that are, you know, so many of the elements are present. And the same thing applies to two great masterpieces that are published in the same year, Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. And you thought they were written by Emily Bronte and Charlotte Bronte, which they were actually, you are correct, but this is not the name that was originally at the title, okay? If you have a look at the first page, I've only chose first editions, okay? So we're always looking at the first page of the first publication. Wuthering Heights, a novel by Alice Bell, not Emily Bronte, but Alice Bell. And then Jane Eyre, an autobiography, not written by Currer Bell, but rather edited by Currer Bell. Yes, Anna.
No, it's just like we were preparing the class today, and we were just like very interested in the story behind the publication of these novels, the Bronte sisters. And also about something that I think you might have noticed, that most of the stories that we have quoted so far were written by women, right? And it's a fact that women, they were a huge presence in Gothic literature. They contributed very much to the development of Gothic literature. I was going to talk a little bit more about the
Yeah, no,
Bronte
I'm just
sisters.
counting here.
Okay.
The Old English Baron by Clara Reeve, so one woman. The Mysteries of Tofu, Anne Radcliffe, two. Jane Austen, Mary Shelley, so the first guy, and then Mary Shelley again. Dickens, and then Emily Bronte and Charlotte Bronte. So you can definitely see 6 of the 8 we've seen.
And we're also missing the other Bronte, which is not who is not mentioned here, Anne Bronte, right? So if you notice the pseudonyms that they have, Alice, Currer, and Acton of Anne, Currer of Charlotte, and Alice of Emily, they created the last name Bell to be their pseudonyms, but all of the first names, they were based on the first letters of their original names, right? And something really interesting about the publication of Jane Eyre, for instance, which is one of the most important novels of the genre, is that it has coined this idea of being an autobiography. And the history behind the publication of this novel is that Charlotte Bronte and all the Bronte sisters, they wanted to detach themselves and keep their privacy while they were publishing the stories. Because, of course, people, if you have an affair with your boss, as Jane Eyre had with Mr. Rochester, and Charlotte Bronte, she was a governess herself, and this is called an autobiography, then people would assume that she herself, she used to have an affair with her boss, and start to speculate about the lives, and maybe even carry some like actual problems for their life. So they always wanted to keep their privacy, but at the same time, they were introducing a subject which is very dear to the idea of the Gothic as well, which is the coming of age story, right? An autobiography is per se an idea of telling the story of the development of someone, right? The life, the being born, and then what happens in the life of this person, but also the achievements and whatsoever, right? And so it is also for a coming of age story. So all of this interconnection between genres, they are being present here as well, right? And Wuthering Heights also is a great example of a Gothic novel. I'm sure that all of you enjoy and have read or want to read it one day. If not, by knowing that this was a very important novel by Emily Bronte, but at least by listening to Kate Bush and the 1980 success of Wuthering Heights, which was, of course, recorded in Brazil again by Angra, our band of the Gothic heart, right?
Yeah, and the fact that Jane Eyre is pretending to be a real book. So, when Charlotte Bronte publishes it using a pseudonym and saying that she only edited the autobiography of this person, she's doing exactly the same thing as Horace Walpole. She's pretending it is a real thing. And yeah, so later, and the same pattern happened again. Success was big, and after everybody loved it, and so she decided, you know what, I'm gonna tell you the truth. I wrote it. My real name is Charlotte Bronte. So exactly the same pattern. Okay. But anyway, let's continue. So we reached 1847. Okay. Then we're gonna get, in a few decades, in 1886, we're gonna get another very well-known stories, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that is continuing the tradition of Frankenstein, of combining the Gothic with the sci-fi. Okay, this is the science fiction. Dr. Jekyll, this brilliant guy who drinks this thing and then he becomes a knight, Mr. Hyde. That's terrible. So once again, the double identity, the good and the evil, and so on, the hidden threat, the claustrophobic place, etc., etc. Okay, a similar thing will happen in 1887 with Dracula, published first in newspapers and then in a book. This is something that we have to take in consideration too. Most of these books were first serialized in newspapers. So actually, you would read one chapter every week for a quite long period. Dracula has what, 500 pages at least? And so it would take you up to a year to read the entire novel. Okay, so the experience was so similar to watching a Netflix series. It was exactly the same thing. You would watch an episode and then you would talk with your friends about it, and then you would have to wait for a week, and then you watch the next one. No, don't tell me what is going to happen. I'm going to watch it tonight. So exactly the same thing is happening, but in paper. Okay. And remember that the Dracula is written by combining letters, diaries, newspapers, clips, even one of the very early audio recorders. So at some point they have this crazy advanced technology that allows you to record someone's voice, and they use it. So Dracula itself is pretending to be a document. It's pretending to be real. Once again, this confusing relationship between what is fictional and what's real is something that is very typical of the Gothic. Yes, I know.
Yeah. And it's something also, the kind of way that the text is presented, it also is observed, for instance, in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, right? Because it is an epistolary novel which is presented through letters, and we'll see it in Dracula, and a few decades later, we will see it also in Alice Walker's The Color Purple. Right? Because The Color Purple also carries this idea of Gothic, and it's also an epistolary novel, right? So all of this ties down in the history of literature, and we have this genre which is not circumscribed to the 18th century or the 19th century, but also spreads on until present time.
Yeah. Just 3 years later, The Picture of Dorian Gray is published, okay, by Oscar Wilde, one of the great masterpieces of the genre too. You know that he was born to be wild, right? So, sorry, I could not resist the terrible joke. And so this is a fascinating book, really. Um, Very influent for what we call in Brazil the symbolism. Okay, so maybe if you like poetry, maybe you've read Baudelaire, maybe you've read Verlaine, Rimbaud, Mallarmé, or in Brazil, Cruz e Souza, or poets like that. They are all symbolists, and symbolism was both an influence to Oscar Wilde, but he himself also exerted a lot of influence in symbolism poetry. And even in Brazil, his influence is tremendous. For example, João do Rio is profoundly influenced by him. You can see that he was a dandy, right? So he loved like fashion and nice clothes. And so you have these very extravagant pictures of him, you know, like with canes and crazy hats and capes. So he's always wearing something interesting. This novel, also in its language, it mimics, you know, the language is very refined, very poetic. It's a very important book. Sadly, Wilde did not go on to write other novels because then he was arrested because he was a homosexual and so on. So, and then he died. So it was a bit convoluted, but this is his swan song, let's say. Okay, it's a beautiful book that we'll be reading in the novel's advanced course. And a few years later, we get Henry James, okay, another great classic of the genre, The Turn of the Screw, at the very end of the century, in which we accompany a governess that is in England, actually. Once again, not in the Middle Ages, not in an abbey or a church or a ruin or catacombs. No, she is in a traditional English house in the countryside, teaching wealthy children. And while she's there, she starts to see first one ghost and then a second ghost that visit her continuously. And she kind of starts to suspect that the children also see the ghosts, but they pretend not to see them. And she's not so afraid of the ghosts actually, but she starts to become very concerned of why are the children pretending not to see the ghosts. So the story is already changing a little bit the genre, and it's a fascinating one. There are at least two interpretations of this book, possibly three different interpretations that run side by side. And you really, by the end of the book, when you close it, you're like, wow, and you don't really know what's going on. It's a fascinating book. I highly recommend it to you. Okay. The Gothic will go on. Before we go, we start talking about the 20th century. Its influence will go way beyond literature. Okay. Maybe in Instagram, you follow a few accounts of dark academia that will be showing autumn leaves and beautiful books and stuff like that. Yes, that is very much related to the Gothic. Maybe you love German expressionism, Nosferatu, this beautiful model here, this very, very beautiful guy. Yeah, actually, Nosferatu is Dracula, right? It is. They wanted to film Dracula. They tried to buy the rights. They didn't have enough money, so they pretty much filmed the same story with a different title, and they thought they would get away with it. They didn't. They were brought to court and they lost it, and they lost a lot of money. Okay, but created a masterpiece. Gothic metal obviously is related to that. By the way, we're dressing in black to pay homage to our theme. And of course, Gothic fashion too, right? So, and so many other things too, right? So just to give you a glimpse, to drop a few influences that go in which the Gothic influenced society, not only literature itself. Okay, and before we talk about its influence on the 20th century, I'm sorry, guys. Nothing comes for free. There's a little bit of propaganda here too, in case you're interested in our courses. So as we've said in the beginning, we at A Book a Month, we teach literature in English, right? We do both things at the same time. And our courses are created by thinking on how much time our students have, okay? So if you have no time at all, we have a course for you. It is called Reading Class. It's happening every week and this at Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And what is happening here is that you're going to be reading these great people here, but you'll be reading them in class. So this is the perfect course for people that don't have the time because of work, because of kids, because of university or whatever, to sit down with a book or a short story every week. And so you just have to show up on class, and then you'll be reading either poems or short stories by these people here. I won't be talking a lot about all of them, but for just a few, Dr. Seuss and Lewis Carroll are famous for their children's for children's literature, right? And some of them you recognize from this class, right? Alice Walker, Edgar Allan Poe for sure, Emily Dickinson, an amazing poetess from the US, Oscar Wilde, obviously, we just talked about him. But maybe you are surprised by the presence of Virginia Woolf in here, because she is the woman who wrote, Mrs. Dalloway. She wrote Orlando. She wrote, the Waves. These great literary modernist masterpieces that are not at all connected with the Gothic. And so you might be a bit scandalized of us selling her here as if she was a Gothic writer. And you're right, she's not a Gothic writer, but she did write Gothic texts. And one of them is A Haunted House. Okay, so a very tiny short story. It has like 3 pages in which she's applying modernism, the techniques, the flux of conscious, the interior monologue, all the different shapes of narration that she's famous for. She's applying those modernist techniques to a Gothic topic, to a ghost story. And then you get a very beautiful result that is typical of Virginia Woolf. The woman did not know how to do a bad job. It's as simple as that. So this is one interesting combination that the Gothic will have in the 20th century. It will blend with modernism quite easily. Okay, William Faulkner, for example, to mention someone else that is a profoundly modernist writer, very difficult to read, completely crazy, but his themes are profoundly Gothic too. So this combination of Gothic and modernism is definitely not only possible, but exuberant and common even. And another of our courses is the short story course that is taught for people that have enough time to read maybe one short story of up to 10 pages a week. So maybe if you have 1 hour of free time, you could read a little bit and come to class every week, and then you'll be reading these people here. Okay. Many of them are great classics. For example, Catherine Mansfield, maybe she's not so well known, but one of the great writers from New Zealand, or Ralph Ellison, who wrote Invisible Man, one of the great novels of 20th century USA literature. They're not Gothic, they're not writing about the Gothic, but we will be reading other things too. But the others, many of them, Mary Shelley, Edgar Allan Poe, Angela Carter, Flannery O'Connor, they're definitely profoundly linked with the Gothic. And so maybe if you're not familiar with Flannery O'Connor and Alice Walker, they are writers that are commonly referred to as writing Southern Gothic. And this is a type of Gothic that was created and it developed in the USA. And we do find a lot of Southern Gothic style in Brazil too. And it's related not so much with the threat and the menace of the Middle Ages, of monsters, but rather of real life of people, actually. So when you're reading Flannery O'Connor, there is no, once again, no abbeys, no churches, no nothing like that. And everything is at our modern day and age. The threat of the past, however, is the threat of slavery, of the oppression, you know, of an oppressive system. And you do find a lot of monsters, but they are serial killers, and you know, they're real people. They are not, you know, Frankenstein or vampires or things like that. So those are two characteristics of the Southern Gothic. And Alice Walker, who's still alive, I believe, and Flannery O'Connor, are two of its great representatives, you know. We'll also be reading in the short stories two authors that are not writing originally in English, Akutagawa in Japanese, and Primo Levi, who writes in Italian. And we do read a little bit of translation because we want to read literature from all around the globe, and these guys are truly amazing. So we have a compromise to present our students with great literary quality too. So mostly in English, but also in other languages sometimes in translation. We'll be reading also contemporary writers like Susan Sontag or Angela Carter. And she is also working on a different combination here, because she gothicizes again the fairy tales. So she wrote many books. One of her most famous is called The Bloody Chamber. You can see from the title, The Bloody Chamber is already quite Gothic. And she's retelling the fairy tales by using a feminist perspective. And she's reinserting in the fairy tales all the violence, all the sex that existed originally. Because, you know, when we think of fairy tales, we think of something that is lovey and dovey and nice and polite. And because we watched the Disney, but before Disney, before the Disneyfication of fairy tales were tough, you know? That when you read the original version of the stories, they are extremely violent. And what she does is she takes back that idea and reworks it to fit our modern day and age. So it's a very, the results are astounding. I love her writing. Anyway, if you want to read a book a month, really, and you have a little bit more time, you could try the course Novels Intermediate. Students read about 30 pages a week. We'll be reading those books in here. Anna, would you like to comment anything?
Sure, sure. I think that Angela Carter, she was not alone when she was taking some kind of literary inspiration in the fairy tales and adding some gothic aspects to it and some sadistic a little bit aspects to it. But we will also see this in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl, this amazing writer that we have like as the author of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I don't know if you remember this, but I used to be super scared of A Confissão das Bruxas. Do you remember this film? The
The
Witches?
Witches, right?
Oh my
This one
God.
is
I
super
think,
gothic. Yeah,
yeah, like
it's very
I
fun.
remember I was like amidst being fascinated by the beautiful face of Angelica Houston, the Morticia Adams, right? If you remember her. But oh my God, the witches, they freak me out, right? And when we think about stories for children, we rather don't identify the idea of a narrative for the little ones to be something that could be so scary, right? Or that could be that could have like some elements that we're just like, oh my God, what is happening here? And although Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, to be fair, it's one of the mildest ones, one of the softest in terms of Gothicism, it actually does also have the same kind of vibe that we see, for instance, in other stories by him. Willy Wonka laughs when the children they are being punished, right? And this is one of those things
Yeah, it's
that
quite sadistic.
yeah, he is sadistic, right? And I'm not smiling because I always have to say this when I talk about something that is bad. Always in class I'm laughing, but it's not because I find it amusing people. It's just because it's ironic, right? But it's a type of aspect of the way that he writes, which he is at the same time combining something that is either humoristic, but also gloomy and gothic, right? It also has this idea of the industries in the emerging industrial revolution in the UK, and what people have the worst, and children and all of that, all of this mix. The same thing goes for Lewis Laurie the Giver, which is a dystopia which starts as being presented as a utopia, right? And it's a kind of story that is very fascinating because it's also aimed at young adults. So the frightening, it also can be experienced by the young adults, which is something nice. All adolescents and teenagers, they like to be scared. Otherwise, they wouldn't go to the cinema and watch films that they weren't allowed to in the first place, as I used to do when I was a teenager. We also read very famous stories, for instance, The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll, and The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie by the Scottish author Muriel Spark. All of these stories, they have this kind of characteristic that I was mentioning beforehand, talking about Jane Eyre. They are coming-of-age stories, mostly because in all of them, we accompany the development of the character since they are like in the beginning of their journey until something extraordinary or maybe disturbing happens to them, right? And the stories, they are very interesting. I'm thinking that you will enjoy it as well, and they serve as basis for other things that we're reading this semester as well. Yes, Áureo.
And finally, we'll be finishing in just 2 or 3 minutes, guys. Our last course is the one that I've mentioned at the start of the class, Novels Advanced. The reason why we're having this teaching this Gothic class, it happens. The novels courses, they only happen once every other week, right? So only twice a month, because you have more reading to do, right? So it decides on what is your approach and what exactly you're looking for. And you'll be reading those. The first three we have already discussed by talking about the Gothic, but maybe you know Samuel Beckett. He won the Nobel Prize in Literature. He's quite influential when we talk about theater. But I would guess that most of you never heard about John Lindsay. Okay, Picnic at Hanging Rock, this great novel. She's considered one of the greatest Australian writers, right? So we really want to discuss authors from all around the globe, and this is why we decided to talk about her. And this one is it's a mixture of journalism and Gothic fiction, because she's basing her story on the disappearance of a few girls when they go out for picnic during the school goes out at a field trip, and then these 3 girls, I think they disappear, and then they start to search for them, and it is a fascinating reconstruction. So you have this combination of Gothic and journalism, which is very peculiar and weird, you know, and it's delightful, really an amazing book, published in the 1960s. Finally, if you think you would need, maybe you're thinking, I can't handle all of these classics, I could not manage the original. If that's what you're thinking, we do offer English classes too. They are created in connection with the readings that we're doing in the other courses. So the idea is precisely to fast track our students to work on vocabulary, on grammar, to help them out, to allow them to really enjoy the original texts by themselves. Those are that is the timetable. You can find that in our website and on Instagram and everything. Our students have free access to any of the classes. So if you're in the short stories, you could come either in the one that is happening in the afternoon or the one at night, or if you are in the novels advanced, you could come on Saturday or on Thursday. It doesn't really matter. You can use it as you please. And finally, the prices, courses that are happening twice a month costs 150 reais, and those that are happening weekly cost 250. If payments are made in a one-time payment, if you pay the entire semester ahead, you have a discount, and if you decide to do more than one course, you have a very good discount, sometimes up to 80%. So you can look in which ones you're interested in, you can have a look at the price list and everything. Finally, once we get to the contemporary literature, the Gothic will really branch out. You see the combination with aliens, for example, when they're talking about Lovecraft, the Call of Cthulhu. You see a remaking of Jane Eyre in a different way with Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. You will see Toni Morrison, a Nobel Prize winner, writing Beloved, this beautiful, nostalgic story about an enslaved woman that sees the ghost of her child, and once again, very much to discuss about racism, about the oppression of slavery, and so on. And also in the movies, right? Alien is very much a Gothic story, even though it's happening in space and you have those crazy monsters over there. Or The Hunting of Hill House, one of the great masterpieces of the 20th century in the US, that was turned into a series by Netflix recently. Netflix, I think, or HBO, I don't know. But the Hunting of Hill
Netflix,
House,
yeah.
nice, very nice. If you want to read something amazing, read that too. And there's so much, much more. Unfortunately, our time is up, guys. So thank you so much for being here with us. If you have questions or comments, we're all ears, okay?
People on the chat, you were always like making very important points and anticipating some of the things that we would see in class today, right? Some of you talked about fairy tales, talked about Shirley Jackson, right? Talked about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Áureo didn't see that, but I was like texting back everyone and just to say how on point you are, right? So people, if you have any questions, anything that you would like to say, Coraline as well, Luana, Coraline by Neil Gaiman has like the same kind of structure as we have in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. She opens the door and goes inside this upside down universe, and this universe is completely Gothic. Yes. Neil Gaiman is very Gothic, right, Áureo? Don't you think that he does have like some?
Yes, but in a humorous flair, right? So
Yes, of
yeah,
course.
Coraline. I love the other
Yeah.
one, the Graveyard
The
Book,
Graveyard
right?
Book.
It's
Okay.
great. That one was very cool.
Yes. Yeah, very much. Thank you, people. Thank you, everyone who's commenting on chat. Thank you for being here. Any questions? Oh, thank you.
Okay. So thank you very much for being here and to sharing your time with us. Take good care and see you around. Okay. Bye
Right.
bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great time. Have a great
We'll be
weekend.
uploading this to YouTube in a few days. So if you want to share the class around, feel free to do so. Cheers.
Bye. Bye-bye, people. Thank you.
Tchau aí.